Hello, everybody. My name is Jenny Dodd. I'm the CEO of TAFE Directors Australia, and welcome to today's session, TAFE on our TAFE Talks. Our session today is about supporting learners online. I'd like to begin by paying my respects to the traditional owners. I'm coming to you from Ngunnawal land, and I pay respects to elders past and present, and I extend those respects to anyone joining us today who is Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander. Thank you to our three speakers today. We've had a slight adjustment to our program today in that we are going to be mixing up our order from what we normally do. We're going to start off today with our TAFE talking. As you all know, those of you who participated in TAFE Talks before, we normally finish with a TAFE who talks about their experience on the theme. Today, we're going to start off with a TAFE, and that will be TAFE Queensland. We're then going to go to our corporate affiliate, D2L, to talk about some of the aspects on this topic that they can bring to light and the importance of supporting learners online. And then Professor Simon Barrie, who is our guest speaker today from Western Sydney University, will join us about 2:30, and he will be our guest speaker then coming in at 2:30. So that's sort of our process. If you want to ask a question, as for those of you who participated before, please use the Q&A, and all panelists can see your questions, and panelists can put responses to your questions in the Q&A. The way we run these sessions is you can't ask a live question, you need to do it via the Q&A. I also keep an eye on the Q&A, and I will then use some of those questions that come through the Q&A to ask the questions in our question and answer session. As you also all know, we finish bang on the dot of 3 o'clock, so or 3 o'clock Australian Eastern Standard Time, in different parts of Australia. So before we begin today, though, I just want to take you for a second a little bit down memory lane. And before I do that, welcome, Professor Simon Barrie. Thank you. You're here early, but you are still the third speaker. So we're still on that program. A little bit down memory lane and take you back 20 years. For those of you who are around in the vet sector, 20 years ago, there was a thing called the Australian Flexible Learning Framework. And for those of you who've known me for a while, you know that I was very involved in that framework. And that Australian Flexible Learning Framework had the goal of moving our whole vet system to greater use of online learning. Why? Why was it important 20 years ago? Well, 20 years ago, it was important principally for access and flexibility. They were the drivers. I think it was also important because what we were trying to do is build resources and that people could use more broadly. And for those of you who were around at that time, we had things called toolboxes that were available to be used by any RTO. It also was about partnerships and partnerships between community organisations, between industry organisations, between TAFEs and industry, and indeed collectively TAFEs with each other, and to a lesser extent probably with the university sector, but there were a few of those as well. But one of the important aspects of the Australian Flexible Learning Framework that a lot of people touched on was the investment in people development. And that people development to give people the skills to be able to deliver in online environments was really important. And there were a lot of projects under the banner of LearnScope, which many people from around the country touched on, had a role in, and actually learned really important skills at the time. But now we find ourselves 20 years later, and I do think the whole experience for the student has changed dramatically. And the last 2 years, if anything, have absolutely highlighted that. I was at ANU yesterday for an event, and Professor Ian Anderson made the comment that we really do need to be investing in the student experience, that the nature of teaching has changed, and that's whether you're in TAFE or whether you're in university. So as we move forward, reflecting now, not just on teaching, what we're doing today is reflecting on some of the support structures that might sit around our teachers and how those support structures can help our students to get the most out of their learning experience. So thank you everyone for participating today. I'm now going to hand across to my colleague, Jo Pyne from TAFE Queensland, Jo probably doesn't need a lot of introduction to a lot of you, but I am going to introduce her. Jo also has been around for about 20 years across our sector in both local and federal government across a variety of senior executive roles. Jo has been instrumental in developing a range of programs that have received awards for their innovative approach, unique and successful partnerships, and their responsiveness to business, industry and community. Jo is Chief Academic Officer of TAFE Queensland. She is passionate about Indigenous vocational education in Queensland. She is passionate broadly about all students and the opportunities all students have to learn. Thank you, Jo, for joining us today, and thank you for leading us off on this session.
Thanks, Jenny. I'm just going to share a presentation today. Now, it's always a bit daunting talking to my colleagues across TAFE. I know a lot of the things that I'm going to talk about you will already be doing, but hopefully there'll be some things there that might be things that you haven't been doing. Like Jenny, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the country that we're meeting on. I'm coming to you from Turrbal and Yagara country around Brisbane, and at TAFE Queensland we recognise that teaching and learning's taken place on country for over 60,000 years, and two-way learning is an important part of our reconciliation journey. I'm just going to go through and do a bit of an introduction, and we actually found it quite difficult to find the right person to speak at this TAFE Talks because so many people across the organisation are involved in supporting students in the online environment. So I'm going to talk about some of the services that we provide directly to support online students. As Jenny mentioned, one of the most critical ways of supporting students is supporting educators to do that, and then how we monitor student engagement. And I'm going to be really conscious of time and make sure I don't go over too much. Okay, so just a bit about our technology. We use Brightspace by D2L. We call it Connect, and that's our learning management system. We use Brightspace Pulse, which allows students to access from their phones, etc. We use a range of intelligent agents. We've recently done some quite significant user testing where we went out and commissioned a company to sit with users as they used our learning management system to see what worked and what didn't. Out of that experience, we've got three major tasks underway. One is better training for some of our educators who, were saying things like, "It'd be really good if the system could do this," and the system actually does. So we need to make sure they're better trained. And we've also done a lot of work on our navigation and a couple of minor things that we'll be talking to D2L about. Also looking at producing a range of support videos for students who are studying. Now, as many of you know, the vast majority of our high volume programs have master product loaded into Connect. About 80% of our students potentially will be taught via Connect. Our plan is to have 100% of our assessments in that LMS. We use Zoom or Teams for virtual classrooms, and we've just adopted Panopto for video storage and streaming via Connect. We've also built what we call Con tools or Connect tools, which aggregate data from various sources. That means teachers can look at units that exist in Connect, identify which students are in them and why, who's delivering them, and what version of master product the unit was copied from, and a whole lot more. So you can really quickly go in and find any student, view their enrolment status, find broke. You can just run a report to find any broken links. One of the more frustrating things that students report back is broken links, so that allows us to fix that and enable notifications for assignment folders from a single dashboard. So it makes it really, user-friendly for our educators. One of the things we've spent a bit of time and invested a bit of money in is our online orientation, where we go through what student support's available, what learning support's available, information about the library, workplace health and safety, our student hub, details about our educators, class locations, connect, course detail and assessments. The last one we've put a real emphasis on this semester and will continue to do so next semester, really improving the amount of information a student gets prior to starting their study. So online students can access counselling. It's readily available from the Student Hub and from within Connect. Accessibility support for students who may have a disability, Indigenous student support, international student support. As well as that, like many of you, we use Studiosity, which really helps students who are studying. Obviously, our teachers aren't there 24/7. Studiosity is, so students can connect directly with people to help them if they're struggling with writing, maths, referencing, and any sort of activities like that. They can go to subject specialists and be supported while they're studying at any time of the day or night. When we became One TAFE Queensland in 2014, we amalgamated our library services. Well, we did that in 2016. We floated the entire collection, so students can access any resource within the network. And we've also got to the point now where 80% of our resources are online. We run online library induction sessions. During peak, we run about 3 sessions a day per campus, covering referencing, research, database and library tools. We normally get about 10 to 12,000 students through those sessions at the beginning of semester. We have Ask a Librarian delivered via virtual chat from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. And we've expanded the purchase of streaming media to support continuity of access. Also purchased Flipster, an online magazine portal to provide that access to our online students. And you can just see an ad at the top of the page there for our virtual library sessions. We push those pretty hard. Our library does a really good job supporting students, so we want to make sure students are aware of that. Study guides, which we put, a significant effort into that as well, as I'm sure most of you do. During COVID, like everybody else, we had to turn, had a week's notice to put all of our delivery online. During that period, we put a big effort into supporting our educators who may not have been experienced in it as others. So we were running 8 webinars a day with a daily topic, 6 30-minute tutorials and 2 60-minute drop-in sessions. So educators could just drop in and talk about issues they were having. We then reduced those sessions to 5 sessions on offer each week towards the end of the 8-week program. Each region provided targeted training, and these training sessions were open statewide because Cairns, North might deliver a range of training, but anybody across the state could link in. We did a lot of training around Zoom and Teams. We delivered about 306 training sessions and about 5,000 educators attended over that period. Obviously, we've only got 2,500 educators, so a lot of them went to more than one. And a daily program of 2-hour drop-in sessions by Gold Coast region, no registrations needed, and we had about 600 of our educators attending those. This was really our best opportunity to model good practice in teaching, which is what we did. All of those webinars and sessions are still available to our teachers, and I'll talk about that in a minute. We provide a very significant professional learning calendar, so we'll run 50 to 60 webinars a month for students to access into, plus a range of other programs. We work with University of Tasmania to deliver, bachelor and postgraduate training, and a whole range of other activities. Accidental Counsellor. I'm sure I won't be saying anything that you don't already know when I say we're seeing a lot more mental health issues coming up in the classroom. We really made an effort to make sure our teachers were given more support in how they could respond to those issues. So that's been a really popular course with our educators. We've had enormous buy-in, which has really helped them support our students online. That's just a screenshot from our website, which talks about, you know, we've got a whole list of recorded webinars, assessment templates, on-demand Connect units, moving to online delivery program. That's the one that I just talked about. We've kept all of that there. An educator help zone, peer learner engagement opportunities, DigiTips, and digital literacy. We run a digital literacy survey every year for all of our staff, educators and non-educators, and then there's a range of activities there to support people who want to expand their capability in that area. When we talk about directly supporting students, one of the most significant activities, you know, as will be the case for all of you, is identifying students who are at risk of not achieving successful outcomes in their course. We do LLM testing for all of our students, and the system we use is BKSB, which is the basic, I don't know what K stands for, skills builder. And it's an online self-assessment tool that, as I said, every student will do. We also provide students with the opportunity to do self-assessment and identify on enrolment documents if they need help. So early identification via Connect on low engagement is also a critical part of that. Talk about BKSB first off. This is just, it looks a bit odd, this clip, but I've tried to cut out the students, or have cut out the students' names. Every teacher will have the results of the survey, of the assessment that the student's done, and it will show you the rating of where they've come out on their English and maths scores. We have benchmarks for every program, so that allows us to counsel students who we know won't be successful in the program, give them some other pathways to achieve their outcomes, or if they're just under the benchmarks, make sure they're engaged really early in their course of study with learning support, and that's absolutely critical. Educators who do this well have you know, really much more successful outcomes, and it's something that we provide a lot of support to educators, so they've got access to this information before their students start with us. We also use data to identify at-risk students within a program of studies. So we use data where there's large numbers of students at risk. We identify triggers, table issues, and take action at the educator team or organisational level, and aim to provide students identified at risk with individualised support. So that's quite a focus for us through our academic board and through our success and retention strategy. Early identification of students at risk is critical. In Connect, we use tools within the Connect system, in D2L system, to find Brightspace, I should say, to find students who've not logged in, students who've not accessed Connect in the first 5 days, those who've logged in less than 3 times within the first 10 days, those who've not completed any formative quizzes if applicable, and those who haven't submitted assessment 1. So early engagement and finding those students before they've got to the point where they can't recover in their studies is absolutely critical. And just a couple of quotes, you know, we had just from students that we have on our website, and just a little call out. I've run through this at a rapid rate, but Julie Healy and Emma Rice will be talking about implementation of innovative early intervention practices. to identify and support academically at-risk students at TAFE Queensland at the TDA conference. So if you're interested in that topic, there'll be a lot more information there. Thank you, Jenny.
Thank you very much, Jo. Jo, there's a few questions coming up in the Q&A if you have time while perhaps Tony is speaking to perhaps put a couple of answers to those. And I do think you're right, Kevin, the K is knowledge. So it's basic knowledge and skills builder. So we now turn to Tony Maguire. Tony has been with us before on a TAFE Talks, and we want to thank you again, Tony, for joining us this afternoon. Tony is Regional Director of D2L Australia and New Zealand. He's leading a team and executive level engagement across the Australian New Zealand region. He's a seasoned executive and industry leader whose experience ranges from Fortune 500 companies, including Apple and Oracle, to advising entrepreneurial startups and leading regional market entries for global companies. Today, Tony is actually going to give a bit of an insight into what's possible through D2L and how D2L has supported clients. Both our other speakers today use the D2L products. So thank you, Tony. Thank you for being part of today.
Thanks for that, Jenny. Jo, I'm always humbled by the way that you just seem to cruise through all the deep and broad work that Queensland TAFE does. You're really quite extraordinary. So I'm going to keep this fairly short. Simon, good to see you again. I will just share a screen. Joan actually did a fantastic job talking about some of the things that D2L provides in terms of apps and those sorts of things. I think it's important just to maybe, like you, Jenny, to spend a moment just level setting a little bit. And I think a history lesson's a good example here. So once upon a time, we just wanted to be able to navigate an information superhighway, right? And navigating that was really simple. You just needed a modem. You need to have someone on a good help desk, Malcolm with Oz email and a desktop computer. And that's all you needed, except for some money and some time and some expertise. So access has always been a challenge. Now we have so many students who struggle just to navigate their courses. We have so many different approaches to course architecture, assessment, design, that almost splintering sometimes of the learning experience has really been problematic for so many learners. Simon will know, as does Joan and so many of you out there, you go and you look at a course or a subject or a learning sequence at one part of the institution is totally different somewhere else. And these kinds of incongruences, inconsistencies really drive a breakdown in learner confidence and learner success. Now, I'm going to use the term learner interchangeably here to be employees who are our clients as well. Also learners. I'm also going to bring in teachers themselves, because instructors, because in a sense we're all learning. So I thought it would be useful just to look at something that's hot off the press, a recent JISC report, and it's actually just come out this month. Now, JISC is the Joint Information something Council, I've forgotten the S, UK-based. They have been doing a tremendous amount of work over many, many years. They've built a lot of toolboxes that have been really useful across the sector to help understand the impact and implementation requirements for good IT and learning and teaching in the education space. But this particular report had a couple of major findings. 2/3 of students still face challenges getting digital resources, assessments, lectures. You know, the modem may be on, but we still can't get those access to those resources. So having those resources in a way of form that's easily accessible, really, really important. As someone said to me once, our LMS is nothing more than a really expensive Dropbox. So having a sense as to how you actually build and create and orchestrate resources with learning assessment for the learner experience is so important. Another interesting finding, over a third, 1 in 3, rated support for online learning to be average or worse. So this comes down to a number of things. It's about resourcing, it's about budgets, expenditure, but it's also about having a digital language, a literacy, a common sense of experience that we can share and leverage. 3 key findings: 42% of respondents preferred mainly on-site learning. Nothing new there. And particularly in the TAFE space, so much of that has to be tied to time and place. So how does learning best be executed successfully for learners when they're in that learning space? 45% would like a mix of online and mixed and on-site. And then 13% want to be mainly taught online. Well, there are places where that can happen, but for the majority of us, there has to be that mix. When I was looking at the title for today, we talked about online, but I want us to expand that and think really in terms of hybrid. When we think about hybrid work, we should be thinking about hybrid learning now. So hybrid learning should be encompassing all those things that we do, from on-site, face-to-face, time and place bounded, through to fully online. So that hybrid learning experience really is I think, for me, the catch-all. Some key themes. I think first principles is really, really important. I jokingly talked about the information superhighway before and having a modem and a few dollars. We were spending a lot of money on access to Oz email or TPG or whatever it was back in the day. And a good modem was, $200-300. I think there's 2 pieces here for access. It's equitable access. And I recognise that particularly for many of our apprentices, they're on $18 an hour. They've maybe just got a mobile phone, and theirs is not an experience which is couched in dual screens, laptops, and a quality tablet as well. They're trying to take their content as they can. They're trying to get their nudges through that are built into the learning sequence through good practice design effectively, and they've probably just got a phone to do it. And that phone also is the thing that they're checking social on at the same time. So there actually has to be an equity of experience in the sense that what they do with their mobile use is kind of mirrored in what they're doing with their mobile learning. So equitable access. I think the second first principle here that I think is really important is digital inclusivity. Going back to those earlier days, I ran a program with Education Queensland where I was going out and providing to teachers a modem and a laptop. I'd go to Longreach and I'd train all the teachers there on how to access and use learning technology so that they could better connect with remote learners. Even back then, that was in the 90s. So digital inclusivity hasn't changed in a sense. The parameters have changed. The expectations have certainly expanded exponentially, but those key challenges still remain. The second theme I wanted to talk to is learning experience, and Joanne encapsulated that so nicely. But it's a learning experience that has to bound the experience of both students and teachers as well, because the learning experience is a complex interplay of all of those components. What we do in terms of structuring a learning design, rendering it on a page, deploying it through something like Brightspace is half the deal. Have we actually properly recognized the skills of teachers? Do they have the requisite capabilities, skills to be able to best teach in that medium? And if they're in a situation where they're teaching from both physical and online, that hybrid sense, do they have the confidence to move somewhat seamlessly between the two? Joanne talked about that testing of the learner experience with focus groups. I think it goes back a step further as well, and that's a sense of co-creation when we're creating content, particularly when we're creating content for emerging areas, green renewables, green technologies, renewables. robotics, the work that Queensland TAFE has been doing with the mining industry in particular, there's an enormous amount of co-design in there. So they're working with the vendors, they're working with the large global companies to create content, leverage content, create that in a way which is accessible to all learners. So the expertise, the knowledge, the delivery excellence that TAFE brings to the table across the country is so important, but it's that ability for TAFE to be able to orchestrate all those various stakeholders to provide the right outcome. Again, I'll just come back to agency and accessibility. And this is something that comes after co-creation. If we're co-creating our content, co-creating the learning experience, and checking in on that to make sure that there's improvement in that experience over time based on data and evidence. Then the second piece that's really important here is agency. And whether that agency extends from the learner's perspective or from the teacher's perspective, that fundamental truth that unless they have a sense of choice and engagement in the project, it's not going to work. And then the third thing, again, Joe spoke to things like Brightspace Pulse, which is an app. It's just taking the way in which content is created. And going back to those learning toolkits, Jenny, there was a lot of SCORM in there at the time. SCORM was the flavour of the month. And as those were being built and SCORM packages were being put in, there was an enormous amount of development work done around and the investment just in building SCORM packages. I think while SCORM still has a role to play, we have to think about open ways of creating content now that don't send us down a cul-de-sac. So if I go back to one of my earlier comments around the inconsistency of navigation, templating, HTML, and that ability to use platforms just to deploy for low vision, low hearing Australians, any learner is really important, and technology should be able to deliver that now, because that's the experience learners have now. Even when they're just taking content, they'll have their captions turned on. So we need to be thinking about the way in which that's deployed in our learning. And all of those things we've just discussed are built into Brightspace. There's nothing new there. I think the last point I'll just touch on there is around platform and partnership. The partnership that we have with Queensland TAFE and with Deakin and with Vic Uni and with UTAS is very much based around how we can assist them to build the technology stacks that are important to them. So we think about the ways in which automation can be used to lower the burden on teachers, improve the success prospects of learners. So where it can be done, we'll automate workflows. Smart workflows, dashboards are really, really important. You shouldn't need a science degree just to be able to access some learner data. Joe's showed you some work that they've already done with regards to numeracy and literacy, but learner dashboards, just in terms of how students are moving through the learning activities, is so important. It shouldn't be anything difficult to actually dive into and understand. It should be intuitive. If it's not, there's better solutions out there. The other thing is the use of that tool, that app tool, Pulse, is important because it summarizes down those activities that are important today. So what have I got to do today to be successful as a learner, as a teacher? Data obviously is so important and the use of that data, but I think the last point is really important too. Whatever you do, you've got an ecosystem to play in, so all of your platforms have to play nice in that sandpit. And do they seek to play well? We're working with a large technology provider across the ditch at the moment, and they're rolling out courses, massive rollout, really ramping up fast. They've been a client of ours for 5 months, and they've fundamentally changed the way in which teaching and learning is happening with teachers and professional development in New Zealand. They have a very close partnership with us, and we're actually helping them troubleshoot, as of 10 minutes ago, some issues they were having as they were moving from one phase of their project to another. They were actually ahead of time, and we're able to actually help them with that. So that platform partnership piece is so important. Finally, if I think about the way that I can kind of tie this together, we have been moving from that disruptive kind of phase. We're moving to an innovation phase. For learners, we have to think about those underwhelming content plays, no more. We really have to be thinking about learning experiences, driving skills development anytime, anywhere, on any device. So think about the standards that you're using. Think about the device it's going to be viewed on, and the multitude of ways in which it will be viewed. Should be ubiquitous access. From a leadership perspective, static reports, all those sorts of things, no longer the go. It's got to be active data. Dynamic data. So you should be able to act on strategic insights and data that's really evaluated against your ROIs. So the last piece then, from an L&D perspective, analysing impact. Again, Joe spoke to the fact that they're not just looking at the impact at the learning level, they're actually going back and looking at the cohort level and the kinds of changes they can make based on informed analysis through arm's length data gathering, which I think is so important. Going outside the business and getting that broader view is absolutely critical. I am pretty much done, I do believe. So I'm going to stop the share at that point, and I'm going to hand back to you, Jenny.
Tony, thank you very much. Thank you for outlining some of those key things, from the practical through to the much more bigger thinking. It gives me great pleasure to introduce to you Professor Simon Barrie. Simon is Deputy Vice-Chancellor and Vice President Academic at Western Sydney University, and he leads the university's academic portfolio. As I was reading his bio, I have actually highlighted the thing that I think is of real interest to today's session, is the 30 years that Professor Barrie has led in the field of higher education as an award-winning teacher with an international reputation for his leadership and research on the transformative potential of higher education. He has led major national research and development projects to support universities in the renewal of their educational programs to meet the needs of a new generation of learners and an uncertain future. I heard Professor Barrie speak at a D2L function here in Canberra some months ago, and I was struck by the words that Simon said at the time, which is, our support structures may not yet be keeping up with our pedagogical developments in terms of supporting students in various modes of learning. So thank you very much for joining us today, Simon, and thank you for giving us some insights into what you're doing at Western Sydney University.
No problems, Jenny. Thank you very, very much. Bujari Gada, which is good afternoon in Darug. Let me acknowledge that I'm coming to you today from the lands of the Barramadigal people of the Darug. Barramadigal, if you start to think about what it sounds like, is Parramatta in our language. It's the place where the eels lie down to sleep. Let me just see. Do you have my presentation, or do you want me to share mine?
We have it.
I can share mine, it's fine. Let me see if I can get this to work. Where are we? Okie dokie. How's that? Everyone can see? Great. Okay, fantastic. Just to start with, Jenny did suggest it would be wise if I give you a little bit of context about Western Sydney University and where I come from, because I think that kind of matters. Why I did see it spy a few familiar names in the participants list. Nice to see you all. There are many that I don't know, so I'm assuming many of you will not know a lot about Western Sydney. Greater Western Sydney has 2.5 million people. It's home to 1 in 11 Australians. It's the third largest economy in the country, behind the central Sydney CBD and all of Melbourne. It has some of the higher than average, shall we say politely, unemployment rates in an urban region and lower salaries. It is also a peri-urban region, so it's right on the fringe of some very precious waterways. And you'll note that in my background, this slide, sorry, the issue of sustainability, the issue of climate is absolutely essential. If you think about the student population at my university, it represents the region. 170 different countries, over 100 languages. 60% of all the new immigrants to Australia end up in Western Sydney, a place that is home to some of the most entrenched disadvantage you will ever see. 8 out of the 10 most impoverished LGAs in New South Wales are within that same massive area of economic growth. We all know what education can do to disadvantage. But what we are facing is a cohort of students coming to education at my level with an entrenched educational disadvantage. So part of what I'm keen to do is to think about, as Jenny said, the transformational power that a university education offers to those learners. I want to, basically I could stop and say, look, I echo everything that Tony has said, everything that Joe has said, everything Jenny said by way of her intro, but I want to just shift it up a notch and make it a little bit more complex. Tony mentioned in his, sort of his remarks, this notion of the splintering that we are seeing within a course in terms of the fracturing of educational experiences. You need to dial that up, Tony, because that has to multiply, because people are no longer taking just one course, and it's no longer one type of course. So there is an absolute disruption in the bigger picture of the ecosystem that I think pedagogically we are struggling to keep up with, partially because of the diversity of those learning experiences. But I think the area we're falling down most on is the support piece, which is why I think it's important to, before you get into the tactical details of the sort of great support initiatives that Joe talked about, the great affordances that a platform like Brightspace can offer you, you need to understand, I think, the complexity of the world in which our learners and teachers are living. And I just want to take that slide into this, so it's a bit of a different way. What's driving that sort of disruption and change? There is a massive skills shortage across the world. If you think about the US, unemployment's about, what, 3.6% it was, 11.4 million job openings, but only 6 million unemployed. This whole notion of retaining learners and thinking about how we support the ongoing learning of our workforce is becoming incredibly important. That's getting magnified by a few things. It's getting magnified by the skills gap. Industries' knowledge are growing so fast that the growth in what we don't know is rapidly accelerating and certainly outstrips what we do know. What we do know has an incredibly short shelf life. It is out of date and redundant almost before you have finished reading the book about it. So I think there is this absolute shortness of the skills gap. Add to that the fact, this is something that I learned while I was in the States recently, Tony, colleague at Harvard who basically said today's babies will live for 150 years. Their working life will be about 80 years. Think about the need for continuing education. So it is no longer just about lifelong learning, but it is about long life learning. It was a lovely phrase that I learned about recently. So this notion about learning, it is going to be continuous, it is going to be rapid, it's going to be multiple. And what we're starting to see is the rise of learners who are building around themselves education credentials. And those education credentials come from a whole range of different places. You know, they may come from TAFE and universities. Those are the fairly traditional ones. The place that they will come from most, though, is one of the words that Jo didn't mention on her slide, the micro-credentials space, the absolute eruption of other types of learning opportunities and other types of credentialing of that learning. So if you're starting to think about learning support, you need to start thinking about learning support in that context. And that is quite different to the traditional student who was just in TAFE or just in university, because they won't be just in anything for anymore. Some of the challenges of that absolute complexity, and if you think about the micro-credential space, and I know from something Jenny mentioned when we were chatting earlier, that you had a session on that recently, that micro-credentials are probably this writ large. If you think about one of the larger platforms in the US, it now has nearly 1 million micro-credentials available for offer for learners. 1 million. You open it up and you go, I've got 1 million learning opportunities and I cannot tell one from the other. I do not know which one is good, which one is bad. I do not know which one is actually going to lead me to something that is useful. I do not know whether doing this will make a difference to my job, whether it will make a difference to the next learner. There is an absolute lack of credibility that is sitting amongst all of these vast array of offerings. And that credibility runs across a whole range of different stakeholders. It runs across the credibility to employers. You know, just because someone has done this strange micro-credential, is it actually going to make any difference if I employ her to this job? Across the learners, if I do this, will it actually make a difference to me getting that job? Is it actually the right thing I need to do? to family. I'm not going to invest in Simon's education if he's going to go and do these things that I'm not quite sure actually will count. And certainly to education providers, when we look at the sort of way we stack things into precedence databases to help learners find pathways into university, these sorts of things will become increasingly important to us. What this is starting to generate is a notion that I've sort of come to think about as an ecosystem for success. And this sort of notion of ecosystems of success has been around, but I think there's a particularly useful version of it that I saw, recently. This basically talks about the notion of there are many things that that ecosystem has to align on in terms of being useful to a learner. And if you think about learning support, it is about the learner at the centre of it. There needs to be something about navigation within all of this, something about how does a learner find what I need? So when I'm faced with 1 million credentials, what is the support that is going to lead me to the right sort of credential, to the right sort of thing? What is the sort of pathway into that sphere of learning that is going to ensure that I am going down a financially sustainable pathway to access that learning? That the support and the way that learning is going to be developed and offered to me will suit the needs and my requirements as a learner. So there's a navigation piece that is absolutely important. There's a targeting of education. We need to ensure that the education we offer matches up with the skills gaps needs of those learners. And at present, what we have done is use a range of what are effectively very long distance curriculum design strategies around skills frameworks that may exist, around sets of learning outcomes that we may look at once every 2 or 3 years. The pace of change here is so much faster. So there needs to be a much more targeted sort of notion of education. There needs to be a transparent hiring system, this notion of how do employers and employment opportunities drive so much of this long life learning. It is around how we continue to be relevant to our current employer, how we find a better employer, how we find a different career, different job. That there has to be a connection that connects whatever this learning is very directly to the hiring and promotion processes within industry. So how do we ensure that learners are supported in terms of seeing those connections? If you think about where this learning has happened, Tony talked about it needing to be hybrid. It needs to be much more hybrid, not only in terms of online or physical, but hybrid in terms of saying it'll actually be all of it in the workplace. People will not be leaving work to go to a university or to go to somewhere else. They'll be learning while they're in work. And if you think about the sorts of education that we offer, be it TAFE, be it university, or the sort of hybrid pieces that sit in between, which are the pieces I'm particularly interested in, that workplace provides exactly the sort of authentic learning environment that we so often spend so much money trying to recreate in educational systems. So when we talk about, at present, Western Sydney, I'm sitting in one of our vertical campuses in the middle of Parramatta at present. If I talk about our next generation of campuses, they will be micro campuses embedded in industries, embedded in the real world, because that's where the learners are. So our last, decade of work building campuses took our campuses to the heart of central cities in Western Sydney, built them next to a train station. We will now be taking the campuses to the workplace, would be the next sort of stage. The integrated earning and learning piece is around recognising that employers will increasingly be paying for that learning of their learners. How do we ensure that workplace supports and provides those opportunities? One of the challenges in Australia in particular around the sort of work integrated learning and the workplace learning is that we've been in the past very good at, I think, providing hours of employment hours for staff to actually go and access additional learning. However, the learning that we provide in those spaces is actually not the learning that staff need. It's the learning that we as employers are often required to make them do for compliance purposes. It's not the things that actually get them their next step on. So we need to think very much around that integrated sort of earning and learning. And the last one then is this notion of wraparound support. That wraparound support is everything else that's on that slide, as well as the sorts of things that Joe talked about, as well as the sort of pieces of intervention that Tony talked about. But if you only talk about it at the tactical learning support piece, without recognizing that learning is happening in a much more complex ecosystem, then I think we will not be doing the thing that our learners need. So if you want to get a push around a pedagogy of learner support, Jenny, I would say the pedagogy of learner support needs to be something that takes into account this sort of ecosystem rather than just what we do when we help a student. Quick stuff around, I'm not going to give you the tour of current state, but just to give you a sense of the sort of things that a university does, it does everything, the same sort of stuff that TAFE is doing. There's nothing that would be any different. A lot of sort of, this is the typical sort of matchup of things that we have for our hybrid students. We have nothing that is fully on campus and nothing, even our fully online things have a little bit of face-to-face somewhere in there. So everything is really hybrid, but you can sort of see the scale and the things that we do. One of the things that is important to flag is that we started to measure the impact of some of that. So things been able to sort of point to things like a 15% increase in retention to international students through a program of Western Success, which is just a peer-to-peer support, targeted analytics driven, very similar to the sort of things Joe talked about. If you target that properly, you can improve retention. Every student retained by a university is about $85,000 lifetime income to the institution. Maths on that is significant, all right. I noticed one of my colleagues is on the call here. Hi, Cherie. This is the model of wraparound support we use for our fully online program. And I share it because I think it's an interesting way to think about the student life cycle within that sort of wraparound support model. It talks about how we support students from that sort of acquisition phase right through some of the more sort of structured support pieces to the work that happens within their curriculum. And you can sort of see, if you think about the things Joe talked about in some of those ideas, you will recognize similar words and similar things in many of those spaces. But I think representing it in this sort of way is a really nice way of presenting it to educators to say, this is how your piece of the puzzle fits into that ecosystem of a student learning journey. So I think I share it for that purpose rather than any of the details. What's next? What's next, I think, is thinking about that complex ecosystem I spoke about, but then thinking about, I suspect, the wraparound learning support around these sorts of things. I think it needs to start very much with a targeted acquisition strategy. I think we need to be ensuring that we get the right learners into the right learning, because so often the mistake is made before they even get in the door, that they find themselves in a type of learning or a learning pathway that is not actually the right one for them. And then they need different types of support, more support, and the help to change. So targeted acquisition strategy. I think we need a clear learning experience strategy, something that says, what is the customer experience at Western Sydney University going to be like, and how will that be different? So one of the pieces of work we're doing at present is looking at some of the big industries and big players who are not educators, about how they have thought about customer experience. And I don't like the word customer. So for us, it will be definitely about learner experience. How can we learn from the things they have done around a learner journey through their organizations that would actually map up with a student set of expectations now around what a learning journey should look like through their education pathway? Because they bring a different set of expectations. Some of that should feed into a very personalized learning plan. There should be a notion that students are not doing the same curriculum as every other student in the classroom. They need to be thinking about how they design their way into that and through it. I think there needs to be some very serious use of analytics. And I think I sort of think of the analytics in a couple of different ways. There's sort of the learning analytics, which is very much around going either where is a student struggling. Some of that is engagement, but there's a lot of other measures that I think are probably more powerful than just engagement. How do those learning analytics feed into driving some of the targeted personalized interventions? How do those learning analytics connect to teaching analytics, to data about the way teachers are teaching, the way their curriculum is designed? So one of the things that you can start to do in these sort of online environments is really parse up what looks like a homogeneous subject and start to see where the different types of learning experiences fit and how those align with different types of learning analytics, of learner experiences, learning performance. All of this, of course, will generate a personalized record of achievement. So you actually start to differentiate for each learner what their learning journey and outcomes and success has been like. Of course, that feeds into a targeted acquisition strategy for your next piece of learning. Sitting in the middle of this is actually saying that all of this work needs to put the student at the heart of it. Our students need to know that they are the ones in control of this learning journey, because one of the problems with support is it can build dependency. So this sort of support needs to build self-efficacy. And some of that is around how you equip learners for the future. So I will stop there. I'm probably gone too long, sorry.
That was fabulous, Simon. Thank you so much. Thank you. That was really terrific. There is a question, I think, that's come through the Q&A, which thank you, Joe, for answering a few of the questions that were directed at the introduction in your beginning one. I'm going to frame this one to Simon. Simon, Kevin has asked the question, I'm wondering about differentiated learning styles and preferences of learners and teachers, visual, auditory, kinesthetic. TAFE clientele tend to prefer hands-on, face-to-face environments, not exclusively, but there is a strong preference that way. How can we better engage the wide range of learners in this changing, sustainable world?
$64 question, isn't it? Great, thank you. First of all, let me just challenge the notion of TAFE learners versus other learners. Probably 20% of our entry is from TAFE. So TAFE learners become university learners. They're not completely separate. If I look at the third highest destination of students who leave university at the end of first year, it's to go to TAFE. So there is more interplay. One of the projects that is happening in New South Wales is something called the Institutes of Applied Technology, which are about creating a genuinely pedagogically different space that is a mashup of the best bits of TAFE, the best bits of university, the best bits of industry. So the learners will be actually will be more diverse. So I think there's not a homogeneity of learners. That said, all of us have different preferences in different contexts for different ways of learning. So, you know, there are some things I learn really well with my hands. There are some that there's not much I can't learn with my hands, without my hands, because I'm that sort of person. But a lot of it is visual, a lot of it is spatial for me. I'm a speech pathologist, so language is incredibly important. But there are some things that I learn better using different modalities. So being able to actually manage that shift as a learner, rather than expecting a teacher to deliver that to me, is part of what I think we need to do. When it comes to support, I think there's a difference. If I was to try and push myself into thinking about, for instance, how analytics might work if you were thinking about kinesthetic sort of feedback rather than anything else, then there are lots of things that we do with VR, AR at present that are around teaching surgeons how strong a pressure to push, teaching about what it feels for a nurse to actually touch a patient. So there's a range of things that I think will lend themselves to feedback mechanisms, I suppose, in all of those modalities.
And I think too, as well, Simon, you talked about long life learning, and in some ways there's that, it's beholden perhaps, regardless of what institution we are in tertiary education, that we keep that top of mind to some extent, because in long life learning, there'll be a need for so many learners to engage, as you say, right across a very broad spectrum. So we've got 2 minutes left. I'm going to just answer Bernadette's question. I'm going to ask Jo if there's anything she would like to add into that conversation. Bernadette, the recording is made available to all of those who registered. And if the presenters are happy to send their slides, we will do that. But the recording is made available. Jo, any final comments from you?
Look, just to reinforce what Simon was saying, you know, good education just doesn't change much, whether it's online or face-to-face. When you're teaching face-to-face, nobody wants to sit and listen to a lecture that goes on for hours. When they're online, they don't want to have that experience either. And there are so many opportunities to make that learning a lot more interactive and exciting, and through the involvement of workplaces and a whole range of other activities. So, you know, the same rules we apply to face-to-face teaching apply in the online world, and it's just finding ways to get the technology to help you do that.
That brings us to the end of today's TAFE Talks. I just want to thank our guest speaker, Simon Barrie from Western Sydney University. I think it's fabulous to have people right across our tertiary education spectrum presenting into TAFE Talks and providing perspectives that come outside our world, to Joe Pyne, who many of you know from TAFE Queensland, and the exceptional work that TAFE Queensland is doing right across the board, and to Tony Maguire from D2L. Thank you very much, all three of you, for joining us today as part of this TAFE Talks. Thanks all. That's it.
Thank you.